No intro, let's just get into it. First, we have my Spartan Captain build. This build is all about using a shield and a spear to stance break enemies very easily and deal massive counterattack damage, just like the real Spartans did to their enemies in 400 BC. Our shield of choice is the Smith script shield, and this little thing is absolutely busted. It has massive range, does good damage, scales well with strength, and has no damage drop off. And it costs 3 FP, which is nothing. Who the hell designed this thing? You can spam this as much as you want and no one can stop you. Compare this to the weapon I originally wanted to use for this build. The Smith Script Spear, a throwable weapon that is slower, does less damage, costs huge amounts of stamina, and has huge damage drop-off. Why? Why did this have to suck so bad? Like, I don't know, really. The Smith Script Shield is very good at picking off smaller enemies and such. You don't even need to use any talismans like the Sword of Alexander or the Smithing Talismans. Just put on the thing and it works just fine. It's even better as a ranged option than most bows. A common bow, L. For bosses, we're using it to apply constant pressure when we can't hit them at a melee range, because this is a stance breaking build, and most bosses have moves that make them dodge away, or do massive AoE attacks where you can't do much while they recover their stance damage. But then you just throw your shield at them a few times, and you're good to go. The only problem with it is that it is a small shield, meaning that it is terrible for blocking, because you do get shit stability, and tons of chip damage. But then that's why we use the Deflecting Heart here. And the Deflecting Heart here has just become this crutch that makes every cool build that might not have worked previously just be viable. You know what it does. If you time your blocks with any weapon or shield, then you get much less stamina damage, no physical damage, and much less elemental damage. But that's just up there, because if you block multiple attacks perfectly, you get much more damage and stance damage with your guard counters. And the numbers are just insane. So yeah, your cool new shield doesn't have 100% physical damage negation. Use the Deflecting Heart here. Your build doesn't deal good enough damage, use the Deflecting Heart here. And it will propel your damage output into the stratosphere. And it just makes every build that doesn't even need it more fun to use. Such a goated item. Our other physic tier is the Stone Barb Crack tier, which makes us do more stance damage. But it only lasts 30 seconds, so be careful when using it. Our spear of choice is the Partisan with the heavy affinity. Spears are really cool for guard counter builds. You get good range, and so you can actually guard counter against some of the more long range attacks and still hit. There is no particular reason I'm using this spear specifically, it's just my favorite spear in terms of looks. Feel free to experiment with other spears if you like. I do occasionally swap to the Messmer Shoulder Grade spear, which is much slower, but it gives us much more damage and stance damage. The S4 that you use is not very important, since you would need to swap out the shield to use it, and that is a bit of a hassle. But I use Royal Knight's Resolve for more damage on the next hit, and this can actually result in some insane damage. For talismans, we of course have the Curved Sword Talisman for boosted guard counters, the Blade of Mercy, which gives us a 20% damage buff when we riposte an enemy, the Spear Talisman for more counter damage, and the Dagger Talisman for better riposte damage. And finally, we have the Look. I was inspired by this post on Reddit, I saw it and I thought, we're using the altered version of the Freya armor, the Freya greaves, the Bolgot helm, and the Crucible gauntlets. Making a Spartan looking build is something that I always wanted to do in Souls games, and I'm very happy that we can make one that looks this authentic in Elden Ring. Next up is my High Priestess build. The idea for this build is that we are a lot like pure sorcery builds, but we're actually a faith build, so we deal good damage from range, we have access to a multitude of buffs and utility spells and different damage types. Being a more support type of build, I think this is more fun to play with summons or in a co-op setting. This doesn't however mean that this build is not powerful when playing solo. Far from it actually, it's pretty solid there too. Our staff of choice is the Barbed Staff Spear. Like the name implies, this is actually a spear, or rather a great spear actually. Great spears are slow poke weapons that deal some very respectable damage and stance damage, and this one is a very solid option. We get good faith scaling and holy damage from it, we also get passive bleed. We only get 55 of it, but that's usually enough to proc bleed at least once in a boss fight, which is a great bonus. Of course we're mostly using this for its weapon art, which is this barrage of holy projectiles that deal good damage from a distance. You can hold this for a really long time, but you can also roll out of it whenever you want, which makes it very versatile. This attack actually has a bug where it actually does deal some bleed buildup. I doubt this will ever be patched, so feel free to take advantage of that. For what spells to use, we of course use the Golden Vow for more damage and defense. We can also use the Howl of Shabriri, which will buff all our damage by 25%, but it also makes you take 30% more damage. However, I don't think this matters too much, because we already attack from a distance, so we're a bit harder to hit. But if you don't want to, then you can use the Light Ash 4 from the Sword of Light, and get a 20% damage buff to your holy damage. I also like to use the Blessing of the Earth Tree, which gives you tons of passive healing and stacks with our other buffs. For offensive spells, we use things like the Giant Golden Arc, which has quickly become one of my favorite spells in the game. It looks gorgeous, has really good tracking, long range, I use horizontal hitbox and can even go through enemies. Golden Arcs is your exploration focused spell. It's much more FP efficient. Spire is one of my favorite new spells. It's one of the only spells where you can continuously cast the spell for as long as you have FP to cast it. Sadly, the damage is just not there, and it's just too slow in general. Don't use this, but keep an eye out for if they buff this one day. Heal from afar is the best healing spell in the game. Use it to heal yourself and any allies that you have. It's much more efficient than using actual heal flasks. Another spell that I like to use is the multi-layered Rings of Light, which has long range, has some good lingering damage, and is cool to have while you're casting your next spell. Our seal of choice is the Spiral Tree seal, which is the worst seal in the game, but it does boost our Golden Arcs and Giant Golden Arc by 20%. And those are our bread and butter. So yeah, we're using it anyway. I occasionally like to switch to the Perfumer Sacred Shield, and on it I use the S4 Holy Ground, which creates this little area on the ground where if you stand in it, you get boosted defense and some passive healing, and it does stack with Blessing of the Earth Tree and other buffs. I also like to use the item Horned Burn, which summons these homing projectiles that follow you around. This deals holy damage, so it is boosted by other items that we use. The damage isn't great on its own, but this doesn't really matter since you will just cast it before a fight and it will help you a little bit. It also attacks any annoying enemies that try to ambush you. This is very situational, but it is far from useless since we do have many ranged attacks. For physic tiers, I use the Holy Shroud and Crack tier for more holy damage, the Deflecting Heart tier, which completely covers for this build's weakness of not being the best melee fighter. For talismans, I use the Shard of Alexander for more weapon art damage, the Godfrey Icon, which boosts charged spells, and all of our offensive spells are chargeable, so this is good for us. I also use the Flux Canvas Talisman, which boosts incantation damage by 8%. If you're able to stay at full health for long periods of time, then replace this with the Ritual Soul Talisman, which boosts all your damage by 10%. Finally, there is the Sacred Scorpion Charm, which boosts our holy damage by 12%, but it does result in us taking 10% more damage, so be careful while using it. This is the look I went for, with the Marais robe, the High Priest hat, the Nox bracelets, and the beige trousers. This is a very unique build overall. It's very niche and it doesn't exactly scream Elden Lord, but I'm sure someone out there would really like this, and I made this for you. Next, there is my Blacksmith God build. I debated a lot on whether this build belongs in the series, simply because it's far too powerful. But then I thought, let's make that the theme, and include it anyway. The Blacksmith God build destroys everything in its way, and you don't even need to try while using it. And we don't even need to look cringy while doing it. If you want to still be challenged while using it, then just go to higher NG plus cycles. The way I like to play this build is to cast Flame of the Fell God, go up to an enemy, deflect one attack or two, and then guard counter for huge amounts of damage. Our weapon of choice is the Anvil Hammer, which is a colossal weapon. This is one of my favorite looking weapons in the game. This thing has the best unbuffed AR of any weapon in the entire game, and it shows. Add to that the fact that the colossal weapons get the most stance damage and guard boost in the entire game, and then add the Deflecting Heart tier on top of that and you have a build that is just insane. The Anvil Hammer has this weapon art where you slam the weapon into the ground and set up spears that do damage in an AoE. This deals decent damage, but is so overshadowed by the rest of your moveset that I just never use it. The Anvil Hammer is not technically a Smith's Crypt weapon, but it does require 11 intelligence like the rest of them. So technically, you can use these weapons if you are bored and want to deal shit damage from range for some reason or another. Our seal of choice is the Giant Seal, which is by far one of the worst seals to have at our level, but it does boost all our spells significantly, and I don't use any other spells, so I use this anyway. The spells we use are the Giant Flame spells. Flame of the Fell God slowly tracks our enemies before detonating, dealing massive damage and knocking small enemies and Malenia off the ground. Giant's Flame Take V has some of the highest damage in the game for a high range spell. It can also knock some small enemies off the ground. Flame Fall Upon Them is a long range AoE option that just melts bigger enemies. Burn of Flame sends these pillars of fire around you, dealing massive damage, especially to bigger enemies that can get hit by multiple pillars of fire. It also puts you in this ducking animation where you can avoid some attacks that way. O Flame is a good melee range option, but Catch Flame is better, so use that instead. And finally, Surge of Flame and Well of Flame are completely lame and you should never touch them. For talismans, I use the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, which gives us more damage when we two-hand our weapon, which we will be doing the majority of the time. The Curved Sword Talisman for more guard counter damage. The Axe Talisman for more heavy attack damage. And the Blade of Mercy, because we might as well get a damage buff after we inevitably reboost our enemies. This is the look I went for, using the Iron Rivet armor, the Circlet of Light, the Banded boots, and the Godric Shoulder gauntlets. Definitely one of the most badass characters I've ever made. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the 4th video in this series where I show builds that are actually fun to me, and not just min-maxed cringe. If you like this one, then I'm sure you'd like the others. They're all compiled in this one video that is linked in the description. Making these is pretty hard and I kinda suck at it. And so I extend the begging hand to the internet and just join the members. Just do it. Or, you know, just leave a comment. The comments on these videos have been absolutely amazing, and I just can't thank you enough for these. Until next time, bye!